What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. It's Core CTO, and today we are taking a look at how to link and string together combos in Gundam Breaker 4. Comboing is relatively simple in Gundam Breaker 4. It's not necessarily something that's super hard to do. So instead of boring you guys with some basic saber combos and stuff like that, instead what I will do is just give you guys some tips that you can do to extend or do even cooler combos while you're fighting the enemy. Hopefully these tips help you guys with making some cooler combos with your suit, and as well as maybe even change the way that you approach suit building when you're trying to combo in Gundam Breaker 4 as well. The first tip I have for comboing is when you're using certain weapons that have this move here. Some weapons have a move that send the enemy down to the ground and give a ground bounce. Now you can normally just follow up with this with a normal attack after the ground bounce hits, and you can relaunch the enemy. But there is a cooler way to follow up as well with an emergency descent. And then you can follow up with an emergency descent and attack the enemy with a ground combo as well. And you can either finish the combo on the ground, or if you wanted to take the enemy back into the air, that's perfectly fine as well. And you can also use your optionals to do this as well. So just a cool way to follow up after the ground bounce for some of the combos. So the second tip that I have for you guys is canceling optionals into EX skills and EX skills into optionals. Now, there are certain EX skills that cannot be canceled directly into an optional. However, all optionals for the most part can be canceled directly into EX skills. For example, we have this missile that can be canceled into this. It can be canceled into this. It can also be canceled into the beam version of this. The beam version of that can be canceled into an optional. So you kind of got to get used to what can and cannot be canceled out of by just going into the test room and just playing around with the suit that you build. But if I had to give you a general rule of thumb, most of the beam saber EX skills can be canceled directly into optionals, and you can kind of loop them together. Something like this. One other thing that you can also do with this is following up with your melee optionals as well, or maybe even following up with something like this to keep the enemy launched in the air as well. Now, for the most part, again, optionals can be canceled into EX skills freely, but some EX skills are a little harder to cancel into optionals, or can't be canceled into optionals at all. For example, some funnels, you can't necessarily cancel the funnel and lag animation into an optional, but you can cancel an optional into funnels, as you can see there. Transformations are the same. You can't necessarily cancel the end lag of the transformation, but for the most part, the beam saber optionals or beam saber EXs are very much cancelable into optionals, and you can kind of loop them together. So keep this in mind when comboing. It definitely can help you out. The third combo tip that I have is when fighting an enemy like this that has the vulnerable meter underneath their HP bar. Now, you'll notice that when comboing them, for the most part, it does get a little hard, especially when they are vulnerable. They may flip out of the combo. For the most part, they'll flip out of the combo if they touch the floor in a knockdown state while they're vulnerable, or if you don't have any of their parts broken. If you don't have any of their parts broken and you make them vulnerable and try to combo them, they will for the most part flip out. But once their parts are broken, you are free to combo them until, again, once they touch the floor, they will get reset again. So you'll see here when I make him touch the floor, we broke a part off for him there, so he does stay in the vulnerable state. And as long as his parts are broken, he will stay in the vulnerable state for quite a while until he gets touched the floor, and then again resets. So when you're fighting enemies like this, your main goal is to try and break their parts as soon as possible. Once their parts are broken, you're able to combo them a lot easier. One other thing you can also do to keep them vulnerable is using moves that shock the enemy and keep them in place. If you shock the enemy and keep them in place while they're vulnerable, they will not flip out. For example, you see if I shock him here, he stays in the vulnerable state, and you're able to combo him, and he also stays in the vulnerable state even after he comes out of the shock state, which allows you to recombo him as well. So using optionals and EX skills that shock the enemy are a good way to keep the enemy vulnerable when you don't have any of their parts broken as well. Another tip that you can use when fighting enemies like this that do get vulnerable is if you're able to break their backpack or their legs off, they go into a permanent knockdown state, and even if they do touch the floor, you can still bring them back up in the air as long as their backpack or legs are broken off. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the Rose Bits / Rose Screamer EX, as well as the Beam Saber Throw EX. And I just want to show you what I mean by when I say that the enemy stays in vulnerable state when you put them in shock. So here we'll put him in vulnerable and then shock him. He'll come back down. He's able to be relaunched and recomboed. Then we'll use Rose Screamer, Rose Bits. He's back into shock. Then we'll put him back into vulnerable. Again, he's able to be recomboed and relaunched. So as you can see there, keeping them in a shock state is definitely a good way to keep them inside the vulnerable state, as long as you don't have their parts broken, and this way you don't want them to flip out. Definitely using those EX skills and optionals that shock the enemy will be the best way to go ahead and keep them inside the vulnerable state if you don't have any parts broken off once again. Here is another example of me showing the shock trick that I just said earlier. I just want to show you guys that this does indeed work, and it is a very, very valid way to keep the enemy from flipping out of your combos when you don't have their parts broken. Just take note here that every time that they are shocked, that they do not flip out, because again, their back does not touch the floor. They do not enter that knockdown state. They're in a shock state, so it allows you to go ahead and relaunch them without them regaining their toughness meter. So just to recap this tip one more time, if you don't have the enemy's parts broken, they will flip. They have a high chance to flip out. If you have their parts broken, depending on the part that is broken, they have a much lower chance to flip out. If their legs or backpack are broken, they pretty much will not flip out for the most part. And if you shock the enemy while they're vulnerable and their parts are not broken, they will stay inside the vulnerable state and they won't flip out when they touch the floor. And you can relaunch them and shock them again and keep going until you have their parts actually broken. Once their parts are broken, you can go for your full combo. Now, a lot of these tips are basically not really for optimal play, more for the style points, but we play hack and slash games for the style. At least I do. When I play DMC, I'm going for that SSS meter. I want all the style, I don't really care about playing optimally, especially when it comes to hack and slash games, which is a single player game. There's not necessarily no downside to you not playing the best weapon in the game. You can play however you want to play, and as long as you enjoy how you're playing, and as long as you're able to clear with that S rank and get those breaker boosters, then you're chilling, man. So that is it for my combo guide for the most part. I wanted to split this up into 2 videos just so that it wasn't too long of a guide and that it was just 2 separate parts, one on boost canceling and then one on how to link combos together. You can use both of them together to make even better combos, hopefully. Thank y'all for watching, and I will catch y'all in the next video. Be safe and peace.